I'd like to take a few minutes to describe in greater detail about the healing process and the particular approach to healing that I take as a transpersonal psychologist and what that actually means. And I'm sharing this to help people understand why I stress the importance of going to the Gong when you've been triggered into some type of an emotional reaction or response. Transpersonal psychology encompasses all the various principles and approaches of Western psychology, looking at various developmental models and cognitive approaches and that kind of thing. But it emphasizes the transcendent or spiritual capacity of the human being. And the emphasis is on working through difficulties for the purpose of raising consciousness so that we can take a spiritual perspective with our lives, that we can always move through life from that spiritual perspective, realizing that we're not the ego body self, that we are infinite consciousness having a human experience. When someone comes to see me, or I'm working with an individual and they have a difficult problem, once I understand the energy dynamic of their situation, the first thing I do is get them in touch with their feelings. Get them in touch with the field of distortion that's associated with their particular problem or issue. Because when we activate that field of distortion and get that person in touch with it, I can then use other practices and processes to help them see that their situation in a different way. So I also provide a pool of love and support for that person so that they can freely share their issue in a space of non-judgment and know that they're in the field of energy of acceptance. So this is part of the process that I work with within the work that I do. It's a very specific type of work, and it involves the unconscious mind. So helping a person identify and access unconscious places, right? It's referred to as the shadow side of the self. When an individual is wounded and disconnected and in denial of some part of themselves, this is the unconscious mind that begins to run the life of the individual. Doing this type of spiritual work is about delving into the unconscious to make what is unconscious conscious by bringing it into the light, to re-examine and to help an individual reframe and elevate their self-perspective. That's what raising consciousness is all about. So even though we can have a Gong session and we can feel better and we can feel our energy balanced after we have a session, the Gong does not access those fields of distortion within the unconscious mind. It's a very certain type of a skill involved in helping a person access those places, because by definition, those are the aspects that are pushed down. This is where the pain and sorrow lives, that a person doesn't want to access, that is in denial around. And so that's when a person starts to move into manipulative and controlling behavior. They are unaware of the source of their actions. They're motivated by pain, but don't realize it. So this type of deep work is an important part of the work that I share through the practices that I share. So the practices on their own can help a person raise consciousness. That when they're combined with the Gong and the amazing emission of sound frequencies that the Gong offers, it becomes more than the practices, because you have the support of all this energy to move energy through the body. So I was very excited when I started to work with the Gong and started to realize its potential when combined with these practices, because the practices help a person open and access their pain and start to learn to look at themselves in new ways and their limiting perceptions. So adding the gong frequencies to that is a huge bonus. It's like having your own therapist when you combine these practices. So that's why I say, even if you only ever went to the gong when you're upset and that field of distortion is activated and present within your experience, and you enter into a state of surrender and prayerfulness, this is what can move mountains. This is what can shift deep unconscious wounds. But the gong can't just access that place. Individuals who are in pain and in a state of resistance, who don't really understand healing or engage in any kind of self-development, carry around a shield of resistance. It's a defense mechanism, and they're closed. So an individual in that low vibrational field won't be affected by the gong in the same way because they're closed. Raising consciousness is an act of willingness by an individual to agree to look at themselves, to agree to go into their pain. It's not a state of resistance. Raising consciousness is taking that step to observe oneself and to engage in some form of self-reflection with a willingness to heal. Right? As Carolyn May says, consciousness is expensive. It is expensive, and it's not an easy path, especially if an individual has deep core wounds and maybe goes through life for decades refusing or not understanding that they can access and heal that pain, and end up operating through those shadow energies, underhanded tactics, as a way of coping with life. So that's why I share, when you have something come up in your life, if you happen to be at home and you get triggered by something, immediately go to the gong and just enter into a communion with the gong, because that makes a difference. The gong is affected by our consciousness. The more open you are, and the more willing you are to surrender, then you're in a state of openness. Your cells are open, and so many diseases are created and held in the body because of low self-worth. Many different types of cancer are associated with low self-worth. So engaging in these practices is one way that you can help to open yourself to get the most out of this amazing infusion of sound waves that the gong provides. And otherwise, just going to the gong when you're upset and when you're down and when you're in pain, with that energy of surrender, will do wonders for your energy. Thank you.